So, our next session, creating safer workplaces for women. It's a topic that most of us are very passionate about, but it's also deeply frustrating because every time we have conversations around it, it's very difficult to actually find solutions. So, at a time when we are celebrating, and we must celebrate women breaking the glass ceiling, the ground situation in workplaces is far from sunshine and rainbows. I can rattle off statistics, figures, and actually, let me do that. Where this is the latest UN supported survey in India, which says 49% women do not feel safe at work, 71% women do not feel safe in public spaces, 52% want a change in men's attitude at work, 50% want stricter policing, 48% want stronger laws when it comes to women's safety. We can also continue to go into rage, and we must, and we did see it during Kolkata, an incident that has left an indelible mark on the psyche of India, where we saw a young doctor who was raped, brutally murdered at her workspaces. Hashtags like no country for women, while they trend, really don't answer any questions. This is once again going to be an attempt to try and find solutions on how to make our workspaces safer for women. Let me call upon our panelist this evening, Meera Chadda Borwankar. She's the former Commissioner of Police, Pune, and Chief of Crime Branch, Mumbai. Calling her up on stage. Can we also get Prabha Chandra, Senior Professor of Psychiatry and Dean of Behavioral Sciences, National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience. Mihira Sood, Supreme Court lawyer, women's rights expert. Rituparna Chakrabarti, co-founder, team leads, and independent director on board. And we, try and attempt, because it's not the first time, at least I'm hosting a session on trying to make workspaces safer for women. But every time it's deeply frustrating because the solutions are very few. We continue to rage about laws, we continue to rage about policing, but how do we actually come up with solutions that work? And Ms. Borwankar, I will begin with you because we are coming at the back of an incident that has shaken the soul of this country. But I'll add to it once again. We saw Nirbhaya, which happened in 2012. We saw Abhaya now. The names keep changing, but the girls are dead. And nothing really comes out of it in terms of outrage. In Kolkata, Ms. Borwankar, we saw a lot of outrage over policing. You yourself have been in policing. What's the way out? Is sacking the commissioner of police the way out, or is it just easy justice to immediately see that it appears to be justice? What is the solution?
Thank you. First, I want to register a kind of protest. I feel there should have been some men in the panel too. Safety of
I
women
agree.
is
I do agree. And I take that. You are right.
because safety of women is not a women issue alone, All of us have to be together in that. And coming to your point, I see two very distinct needs. One is that, like you said, transferring the Commissioner of Police Kolkata does not solve the problem. Or immediate action against the police doesn't solve the problem. It has to be community led with the police working together for the safety of women. And one, community led with police, and secondly, more resources to criminal justice system. I feel states are going in for very soft options. They will have to invest in more police officers. International recommended ratio is 220 per lakh of population, and in India we have 160 per lakh of population. That is police in uniform. Our own law commission said that we should have 50 judges per million, and we have only 21. So I'm saying quick trial, prompt trial, immediate action, punishment, of sexual offenders, that and total support by community are the two solutions I can identify.
And your point taken, Ms. Bulwankar, because I do agree that women's safety, even workplace or otherwise, is not the responsibility of just women. And I do agree, and it's noted the next time around, we're going to try and have many men on the panel as well. And that's how you possibly take the conversation further. So I do agree with what you say. Ms. Chandra, coming to you, we can get into you- better policing. Definitely, we need better policing. But then there's a whole conversation about stricter laws. There's talk of capital punishment. It's known not to work. We've seen what happened at Nirbhaya. There was capital punishment. It's not that the crime graph has come down when it comes to where women and crime is concerned, especially at the workplace. We've seen an incident in Kolkata right now where a doctor was raped and murdered at her workplace. What is the solution to it? Because, you talk about laws, there are there. Policing, it's, yes, you can blame the police. Better policing, always push for it, but that's not the solution. We all know it. In optics, it works. It works to see that the police commissioner is sacked. So there's responsibility, accountability. But having said that, then again, you can turn around and blame the mindset of people and men. But how do you actually move forward and try and find tangible solutions that we take away from this stage and say, if we do this, things will get better by next year?
Thank you. I think I'm not very hopeful that it'll get better by next year, but definitely the need to understand that sexual harassment is not a sex problem, but it is a power problem. The issue is related to inadequate power. So research has shown that workplaces which have more men, which are male dominated, which have a very strict hierarchical structure, where don't have enough women in leadership, it's a ripe ground for sexual harassment. If you go to company leaders and you tell them, or organizational leaders, and tell them, how do you improve safety for women, there's tokenism very often, street lights and CCTV, and that's not going to solve anything.
Or internal sexual harassment committees?
Of course. I mean, I think that is mandatory, and
By law.
it has really made a lot of difference. The very fact that a woman can have recourse. But I think the point is that more women leaders who call it out, who label it, and the fact that men recognize that there are certain areas that they should not tread on. Boundaries, respect, consent. These are three things that I think men need to understand. So sexual harassment laws and gender sensitivity need to go hand in hand. And like I said, many, many more women in high leadership positions.
You've been looking at it very closely in terms of what are solutions there. You've studied it. For you, what are your biggest takeaways? If you think that this is what we do, then we at least, maybe our approach was wrong till now, and we are at least on the right path to address the situation on hand.
For me, I think bystander education is very important, because many of us actually witness it happening, like you saw in the Kerala movie situation and many other situations. We see it happening, but we don't know what to do about it. So, and there are four kind of bystanders, according to me, having dealt with many perpetrators as well as people who, handle sexual harassment, women. There are four kind of bystanders. One is a passive bystander who just looks at things and does not do anything. The second is a dissuader, and those are the most dangerous, who say things like, "Oh, he's in a very powerful position, kuch nahi hoga, you lose your job, leadership will not do anything," and these are dissuaders. And then you have instigators, which are even worse, because they use this as a way of getting back at management, at the organization. And then there are people who think this will bring a bad name to the organization, to the industry. So that's another problem. And finally, there are enablers and advocates like us. So I think educating bystanders, people, your colleagues, about what you need to do when somebody comes to you and says this has happened, is to me a very, very important intervention.
You know, I read something from Margaret Atwood actually, and she says every woman has a story. You just need to ask her, especially if she's been at the workplace. And I just want to, throw that question out to all the women here. How many of you, in somewhat way, women, have faced sexual harassment in their workplace? At whatever level. It could be small, it could be big. Just raise your hands. Has any of you? You have, ma'am? So I have. If you're really true to yourself, okay, there are hands at the back as well. Yes, there. So, even in this small group, there are so many women, and most of them are men right now. Most of these women have actually raised their hand. But, Mihira, to get you in, once again, there's so much talk of laws, strengthen the laws, but the laws are there. Post Nirbhaya, we'd seen laws, and what Ms. Burmankar says is a time frame. It's the process usually is worse than the punishment of going through years and years of the same trial. For last week, I remember doing a show of something which happened in the early 90s in Ajmer, and now is when it's seen conviction of under POXO for those people. What is your take?
I think I want to. There are certain things that need to change in, speaking of gaps and speaking of where, people can take tangible steps. I think there are three things I would like to say, not in relation to the law, but in relation to what a visionary leadership can do at the workplace. And then come to the problems with the law and what should be done about that. And also to broaden it, I know that, Ms. Borankar was talking more about sexual assault and, kinds of really violent crime, for example, that we saw in Calcutta. Safety of women at the workplace includes even less violent crime. There's, of course, posh and, so many other things that come into it as well. The first thing that I think leadership needs to consider, needs to implement, and it's a mindset shift really, is that safety is not a charity, it's a component of equality. And that is extremely important because then safety is based on empowerment and not protectionism. We don't want a situation where women are not taken on for certain roles because, safety is an issue and the employer, feels that they're doing the responsible thing by not taking women on for those roles, whereas, the responsible thing would be to ensure their safety. So that's an example of where safety is an obstruction to women's equality. And we need to see safety as a part of equality. Without safety, there can be no equality. And without equality, safety is just another cage. So that mindset needs to change. And this also means that our idea of what are the workplaces where this kind of shift needs to happen and these kind of regulations need to be enforced needs to change. I think from the time the Sexual Harassment Act came into force, our idea of what constitutes harassment, what constitutes abuse, has to some extent changed. We're a lot more aware now of the different forms that abuse and harassment can take, and not just looking for outright violence. But there is still a sense that certain workplaces are too small, too informal to merit that kind of regulation. And it's important for every employer, whether it is, it's not just government offices and MNCs and corporates, but every small restaurant or a library or a film set or even somebody's home where there are employees coming into work is a workplace for even one person, and there is a responsibility on the employer to provide a safe working space. And this also requires shedding the instinct, and this is where laws don't do enough. Although I'll still come to the problems with the laws, but laws don't do enough because laws incentivize us to go for the bare minimum, do what is the bare minimum required to be legally compliant. But when we're looking at a kind of social shift that we need, and all of these laws are in the spirit of that social shift, we need to look at that spirit We need employers to think bigger. Don't think bare minimum, think maximum. What is the maximum I can do for my employees? Not what is the bare minimum I need to do. That mindset has to change. And we need to see it as a positive obligation. Not a burden, but something that we can do because we're all part of the social contract here. And somewhere along the line, we've forgotten that. But having said that, very briefly on the Sexual Harassment Act, what we call the POSH Act.
Yes.
Um, I find it, I've said it before, I've written about it. It's a problematic act.
It's deeply limiting.
It's extremely inhibiting. In fact, I was part of the Justice Verma committee that was set up to look at some of the laws and reform. And the POSH Act was actually passed in the immediate aftermath of that. But
yes,
this was not what the committee had recommended. What we had recommended was something more along the lines of an external dispute resolution mechanism. Because, you need to understand that, you're still complaining about usually a superior, officer in the company or the workplace. That person is likely to be more important to the management, is likely to be closer to the management.
So and there's always an attempt by any company to then try and protect its own image, because then it's your reputation on the line.
And not just that, but then between the two, between the complainant and the accused, there is an inherent bias towards the accused because they are likely to be senior.
True.
So there is that. So what we need, and I serve on so many internal complaints committees of different companies. There is one external person mandated by the law. Frankly, there should be, if not an external body, like you have in the US, something along the lines of the Equal Opportunities,
right?
Commission, Employment Commission, which it's basically an informal kind of court. So it's like a consumer court, in a sense, where people feel more comfortable going to raise complaints, don't feel that intimidation of a judicial court, but it's outside the organization. But if not that, at least there should be a majority of external members. The chairperson should be an external member. There should be, I've served as an external member, and I know that once I give my recommendation, I have no knowledge of what goes on then or how it's been implemented or any authority to follow up. There should be a committee, at least an oversight committee, to monitor that employee for at least a year or so to make sure there's no backlash.
How do you push that? Now, how do you push that in the workforce where India is concerned? You talk of safety and the interpretation of safety. There are two constructs of liberty or safety like that. One is negative, liberty. One is positive liberty. And that, you see it in every workforce. Most women then are told, don't go out. Don't, your workplace is too far. And we are all privileged. 70% of India works in the unorganized sector. So for them is to go from a village to a factory. And that's where negative liberty comes in and says, इतना दूर आपको जाना है, बस में जाना है, रात को light नहीं है, कैसे वापस आओगे? So, and then of course, with what we talk of and what we push is positive liberty, is to go occupy public spaces. What happened in Kolkata, go out at night, reclaim the night, seen there, women. But it's two different worlds that we live in. I want to bring in, Ms. Chakrabarti in this as well. And she has a radical view, and I quite agree with what her view on this is as well, is that women have to also stand up and take onus. And yes, a lot of times they don't have that option, but over to you.
Okay, so when Preeti asked the question about sexual harassment, if some of you noticed, I did not put my hand up. And that's because that's my reality. But let me tell you why. So in 2002, I started a staffing company along with two amazing co-founders, male co-founders, Manish and Ashok. And I feel I got really lucky. The fact that I was able to join hands with colleagues who are males, but who never brought gender into what we were about to create. So hence from that point in life, and which is about, I'm talking about 2002 onwards, I have been able to create the workspace that I would love to have worked if I were working otherwise, where women could feel safe. And why am I saying that? I mean, that it's in the hands of women. Because I was in that position, I was fairly young. Of course, I went through what most women go through, marriage. I had a child. Was it difficult for me to navigate my responsibilities as a founder and also take care of my responsibilities as a mother, as a wife? Yes, it was. But I think what happened is my colleagues, my family essentially enabled an ecosystem where I could stay on in the workforce, and especially some of those critical junctures. And because the workforce that I was managing saw significant number of women leaders within the organization in positions of authority and power over more than 2 decades, the organization became in itself a safe space. Where I'm heading towards with that point is when you essentially have women in India today, 0 to 5 years, around that bracket, it's very inclusive. Women are able to get into workspaces. It's just that when they're reaching that 5 year experience level, they drop out. And then after that, what's happening in managerial position, team leader, department head, executive board, women are disappearing. And that's the ecosystem everywhere. I mean, whether it's in banks, politics, maybe God knows how many places. So if women are not there in positions of power and authority and decision making, whether it's laws, rules, judiciary, police, you will never find the balance that the society needs to make women feel safe. I'll give you a simple example. Airports. About 10 years back, 15 years back, we used to have a separate queue for women, right? Women have to come in. But have you seen that disappear today? Do you see fewer airports today have a separate line for women? The reason is, and honestly, in many places where earlier there used to be a separate line to make women feel safe, that's disappearing. How is it disappearing? There are more women travelers today. Women are traveling more independently, hence it's becoming a safer ecosystem.
But doesn't it put the onus on women, something that we've tried to beat
Absolutely.
in the first place? Because then, you're putting the onus on women for their own safety.
But
you need to go beyond that conversation.
But I honestly feel that it does begin with us women, because my belief is, and even if it's an unpopular belief, hear me out on this. How many men out here feel that for them being in a job is an option? How many men? Do you think there is an option? Is being in a job an option? Great. You have one person. What I mean is that I do believe, and whether you like it or not, a lot of women think that them being in the workplace and being in a job, they have an option of not to. That has to change. And if I have to appeal to everyone in this room, who male colleagues and male friends in this, is that every time you feel the temptation to tell your sister, to tell your wife that don't worry, don't take the stress, you don't have to work, I think refrain yourself. Resist that temptation, because I'm telling you, there is a long-term impact of having women in workplace. Women are needed for women to feel more safer in this world today. Women's workforce participation in India is 25%. It's lowest.
And let me break that down, because this conversation, Ms. Chakrabarti, could be great for this audience and could be great for that 25% which is recorded, and we can have that conversation, and we should. But like we pointed out earlier, 70% of the Indian women workforce is in the unorganized sector, and for them, fortunately, unfortunately, work is not an option. They have to go and work and have to make that set amount of money to bring back. And I want to, get you back in, Ms. Bavankar, in all of this. We are running out of time as usual. There's never enough time to discuss women's safety. For you, if you have to give out solutions, which you did begin and touch upon right earlier, what would they be? Because whatever we have come up now is clearly, we are failing at it, or we are not on the right path on how we are addressing it. The only thing I think we have been able to address is mindsets, because now at least we are talking about it. We are talking about, as a society, we need to change. But What more can you add? What's your biggest takeaway? Do this and we're on the right path.
So one, I agree with all the panelists. More women in workforce.
More women in workforce.
And for our information, we have only 12% women in police in India, while other countries have gone up to 30 to 50%. More women in workforce and more women at leadership positions. And let's claim the country, let's claim the space as ours. These men have kept us out for too long and we have tolerated it.
I so agree.
So let's become intolerant to male dominance of workplace, assert our rights, and then let me assure you, sometimes police does not come up to your expectations. But if we increase the number of women in police, more women in the leadership level in police, and train them regularly about the rights of women, about POSH Act, and regularly train them, you will get satisfying treatment even when you go to complain.
There is also a byproduct of it, which we touched upon, because most women fall off the workspace ladder. And 5 years, 6 years, then they stop working. And then suddenly you'll see this whole mid-level where you won't find any women. And it's an empty workspace. So other than just addressing the real question, which is safety at work for women, you need to also address how to keep women in the workforce.
Absolutely. I think more women at middle levels who can then be trained and groomed to go on and leadership levels is very important. Because once you reach the top, you sometimes lose sight of what is happening below and may not be entirely sensitive to what's happening there. So that's one thing. And I think in addition to what other people have said, I would work with men. Because I think, what is it which brings on the perpetrator
The second
mindset?
one, I'm sorry to interrupt
Yes.
because I just want to. So, number one, get more women in the workforce. And all of this is aside from faster judicial process, do all of that, but do this. And you're saying work with men.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think that, in terms of knowing what is wrong, what is right, what impact lewd jokes have on a woman, what is the impact of harassment on a woman's mindset, is something that I think many men lose sight of because of the way they are brought up, because of acculturation, socialization, toxic masculinity. And I think this absolutely needs
Has
to be
that
addressed.
changed? Has that male mindset changed?
I think in the Gen Z, it has changed. I can see that the younger generation is very different.
You think it's changed?
Much more mindful.
Only Gen Z or
Mainly Gen Z, but maybe a little bit on top.
millennials?
A little bit, yeah. But I think that, there is a change, but it needs to be much, much more. And it shouldn't be for fear of being complained upon. I mean, that should not be the driving force that men don't do anything. It should be a genuine sense of respect and giving dignity to women who work with them.
And that also, again, you come back to that begins at home. So, but okay, so we've come up with two. I'm sorry, it's just like a rapid discourse that we are taking, but Mehra, would you want to add to it?
In the spirit of rapid discourse, let me then say something perhaps controversial. But since we're talking about more women in the workforce and more women in leadership positions, I don't think we can really wait for that to happen organically because too many other things need to fall in place. So I'm a big proponent of affirmative action. I think we need to have leadership roles, certain leadership roles in all organizations. And again, it comes back to visionary leadership. And it comes back to seeing it as furthering equality, not charity. It's not a concession. Equality is something we all need to see ourselves as equal stakeholders in. So yes, I think we need to kind of also speed up that process where we can. We need to also, even in conversations like this, I think resist the urge to limit our discourse to our social circles and our spheres of influence, because
Move beyond the echo chamber.
we need to move beyond that, because when a lot of where we see change is in that echo chamber. So I think some other dose of reality, in terms of depressing dose of reality, needs to also be injected into our everyday discourse. And just honestly, creating a safe, a respectful workplace. Um,
The onus also now needs to be on organizations.
yeah, exactly.
To
And
stand up and face the mirror instead of usually when there is a complaint, you turn inwards. You
and
try
then,
and protect your organization.
and
That
it,
becomes bigger than the person
so
who's
there's two
complained.
things. One is prevention and one is dispute resolution. I think organizations can take the lead in both of those things. As Prabha Chandra said, sexual harassment, sexual abuse thrives on power. So an important step can be for organizations on organizational leadership to create flatter workspaces, with fewer hierarchies, more democratic workspaces. I think just basic norms of respect and friendliness in the workplace, which can be, very creatively implemented, go a long way in preventing this kind of thing that because it thrives on on power hierarchies, imbalances, and basic lack of respect that tends to dissipate once you start to see somebody
Right.
as your own. That's how it is. That's human nature. And the second is, of course, that how do you respond when disputes arise? And again, the law can only do so much. I think organizations need to also think creatively, solicit suggestions, maybe from employees, on
Right.
what do you think we can do to make things safer for you, particularly where, mobility, location, all of those things add to the sense of insecurity for working women. You
Right.
know, ask them, what do you think we can do? If maybe our imagination is limited, but ask the people who need it.
Ms. Chakravarti, you want to come in?
Yeah, hi. So I think one, of course, is there has to be a zero tolerance top-down communication now for all organizations, and not just the ones which come under the purview of scrutiny and more regulations or supervisions, like especially
Has
listed
that
companies.
gotten better, especially in the corporate world?
Sorry?
Has that gotten better?
A lot better.
Yes? Okay.
However, I would also say that that's also on account of fear of non-compliance to some extent. But I'll live with that. Even if it begins with the fear of non-compliance, but that translates into positive discourse on ground. Has it gone to where we ought to be? Of course, it is not. But I think the top-down, no nonsense, showing zero tolerance for even the simplest or single any such incident, like Google actually did that recently in one such case. So I think that particular action, like a lot of us are saying that do not belabor and delay decision when such situations come to light. Sometimes organizations of women lose faith, and then they usually tend to become quiet when they have seen that there is an incident and it got hushed up or it did not get the necessary resolution. I said the immediate action is needed. And also, I think overarchingly, I have to add one thing, that the more we make this bit as a making women's work safer at workplaces a men versus women narrative, it's actually going to be more dangerous for women. We have to make men allies to this discourse. As a matter of fact, having more equitable balance actually is good for men. Less blood pressure, less mental issues and other challenges. And I think they have to be bought into this whole scheme of thing. Otherwise, what happens is every time a regulation comes in, it goes against women. Maternity Benefit Act came in, it went against women. The posh one, it actually has encouraged many employers not
Have we,
to say that let's not
the
hire
time is up,
women.
but Ms. Bhubankar, I'll quickly. Have we made this men versus women?
No,
Because
no,
it shouldn't be.
No, we are all together. But by the way, Rajdeep and Rahul Kavan, they have both got scared and run away from the panel.
I'll hold them accountable. I will hold them accountable.
So it's all of us together, definitely not men versus women.
So it's all of us in it together, but we've come to the end of this session. But I also do feel that some of us who come from privilege has this deep responsibility to speak up and continue not to push the envelope, but flick it off the table. Because I think I'll end with Margaret Atwood again with what she said is, if you didn't want us to raise an army, you shouldn't have given us uniforms. And I think as women, we've always been treated as this one caste group or a clan. So we're going to just end it there, and I will, the other anchors. You know, you were right. Maybe a Rajdeep and a Rahul should have actually moderated this session because, you know, I'm preaching to the converted and vice versa. So,
डर गए हैं तो अच्छा ही है हमारे लिए.
no, I agree, and I'll pass that on. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I know it was really short, but at least we've come up, or we're going to leave the stage with a few takeaways, and which is number one, to push for more women in the workspace. That's what we need to do. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Thank you so much.